everybody. I'm Ed Shelton, and you're listening to Greater Good Radio with Bob Koch.
Welcome to Greater Good Radio on WOR 710 AM, the voice of New York. Welcome to this episode of Greater Good Radio. I'm Bob Koch, and today we are going to discuss hate. What is it? How does it spread? And how do we finally confront this topic with our neighbors, friends, and identify those who would act out against other people and groups causing harm and in some cases death? My company, Greater Good Media LLC, has begun a 4-year campaign to approach this issue so we can prevent acts of violence and mayhem. The program is entitled We Can Do Better. Be sure there are individuals and groups gearing up to reclaim their slanted agenda in 2024. What we are advancing is a very direct approach with those who may hold a misguided belief that others should be eliminated because of a misconceived threat, or may choose to act out against people after adopting a deliberate false narrative. What our intention is here, for the long term anyway, is to strike right at the heart of where some of this emanates. Most who have acted out have been radicalized or associated with hate groups in prison. That is our first stop. Schools are next in line to spread the word that hate has no place in the world if we plant a future for the human race. It's wonderful that so many get involved to do a show or raise awareness about this subject, doing a video. But what about those who aren't getting involved, who aren't listening to the messages from others who are so concerned about this? That is the focus area most needed when we share with each other. I believe we can stay safe and coexist based on my own personal experience. Our first guest is the mayor of Livingston, New Jersey, Mr. Shawn Klein. Shawn, who is also a physician, is a caring individual on many levels. He was a panel member for the 2021 Mayor Summit to combat anti-Semitism this past March 16th, and we're lucky enough to have him on the show today. Welcome to Greater Good Radio. Mayor Klein, thanks for joining us on Greater Good Radio.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it, Bob.
My pleasure. You were a panel member for the 2021 Mayor Summit to combat anti-Semitism. Could you describe that worldwide mayor's mission and why it came about?
Well, I think there are a lot of different aspects to this in terms of why it was necessary. But anti-Semitism, just like other forms of hate, have been creeping up in the last few years. And I think there are a lot of different organizations that have tried to address this, but having local leaders involved is probably the most effective way of doing it, because the mayors are the people who have their feet on the ground and are the ones that are around the smaller chapters of organizations that are trying to do the work. They know the players in the game in terms of perhaps who's trying to do what's right and what's wrong. And they can be there and try to make a difference.
Okay, well, I lived in Livingston for a couple of months some years ago. Tell our listeners about Livingston, because it is such a diverse community.
Livingston is very diverse. Yeah, we have a very large Jewish population. We have a large East Asian population, Indian population. Of course, there are people from European backgrounds. So there's a big mix of people that live here, not to mention Black Americans. And when you are living in close proximity to so many different kinds of people, I guess you have to make a choice about what kind of town you want to be in. Do you want to know your neighbors and understand your neighbors and have empathy for your neighbors? As a township, we work very hard to create an atmosphere and create events that bring people together and make sure people understand each other and understand that people are people, and people generally have the same concerns. They want a safe place to live. They want a good education for their children, and they want to feel that their town is a welcoming place. And in Livingston, I think we've done that.
Oh, there's no question. I really believe Livingston is a shining star on how people can get along. I mean, it is a beautiful community. And I have to address the topics of hate and getting to the root cause is like pulling apart a grilled cheese sandwich. It's messy.
Sure.
You know, and but what are your hopes for the future?
Well, listen. I'm a physician,
Sure.
and I tend to approach things not just as a mayor, but also from a biological point of view.
Right.
And I think, unfortunately, there is a little bit of an inbred um, tendency for humans to have an us versus them
Hmm.
sort of tribalism that's built in, and it's a big problem for us. So we're in a situation right now in the country where there's changing demographics, and the people who are, the ethnicities that were formerly in power, there's a shift going on there, and some of those people who were of those ethnicities or are of those ethnicities are anxious about the future. And I think you really have to take a look in the mirror and look at yourself and say that, you know, do you feel threatened by people just because they look differently than you, or pray differently than you? If you do, if you feel threatened, I think you need to search your own soul, because
Yeah.
the problem doesn't lie with the other people. The problem lies inside yourself.
Sure. I couldn't have put that any better myself. We are absolutely on the same page. But what is frightening is that people continue on basing their hate towards others on false narratives. There are people right now out there spreading tales that there are politicians getting together eating babies. And I just find this in the United States in 2021. I can't get my head around this
I,
because, as I had mentioned, you and I have had a couple conversations now, and I have up on the website, people that do not learn history are doomed to repeat it. This was the exact propaganda that Hitler used in the 1930s. Said the Jews were eating babies, they were just the worst, and they had to be eliminated. And what in your mind, in your thought process, is a good way to approach this, or
well,
is
I,
there a
so
good way?
well, I'll make a couple comments about what you said to start with, and then I'll get to the second part.
Hmm.
First of all, I think the term "big lie" became popular in the media to explain how Trump lied about the outcome of the election,
Hmm.
with the understanding, and some people may not realize this, that "big lie" in quotes is actually a term that was used by the Nazis, because they understood that if you make a big enough lie, not a small lie, it was necessary that it was a big enough lie that people would actually be more likely to believe it. And that it comes from Nazi propaganda, the term "big lie," and I think it's important people understand the root of that. I also want to talk about, Tom Friedman, in some of his books in the past and columns, has written about superpowered individuals, and you're talking about the ability online for people to spread lies, and this is something that should give us all a lot of pause, right? If you think about um, what one bad, someone who's in the wrong place and who's smart and is determined to do something bad,
Hmm.
the tools at their disposal, whether in terms of weaponry or technology that they have can have access to, is can one person can do a huge amount of damage. It didn't used to be this way in the world,
No.
and so your point, Bob, and your whole concept here about addressing the cause of hate become extra crucial, because the individual now has this ability to do incredible damage, not just large groups of people. So we have got to drill down on this and try
Yeah.
to address these issues.
Yeah.
And yeah,
I no, I didn't mean to interrupt you at all. I'm just agreeing with everything, in just such a fluid sense of what you're saying. It's going to be 19 years that on April 29th in 1992 we had the Los Angeles riots, and Rodney King came out and said, "Can't we all just get along?" And would it really be that hard? I mean, for everyone to embrace the freedom that we enjoy as Americans, and just Roosevelt said, a chicken in every pot and two cars in every garage. Maybe the two cars may not be the thing right now, but you know we have an
well,
obligation to each other as human beings, and I'm hoping to God that that is not evaporating.
I listen. The Rodney King comment when he made it was, widely ridiculed. Ridiculed, if you remember.
Oh yeah,
because
yeah.
it was such. But you know what? He's 100% right.
Yeah.
There is an honesty in that statement. There's a general plea of desperation in that statement that should have been more well recognized and embraced instead of ridiculed. And I think about, again, from a biological point of view. We have got to get rid of us versus them. It's just us. That's
Yeah.
it. Okay. And there was someone speaking on the a radio story the other day about a scientist who was talking about the difference between chimpanzees and bonobos. All right. And so, but most people, a lot of people have not heard of bonobos, but bonobos look like smaller chimps. They're one of the 4 great apes besides humans. And humanity shares 99% of its DNA with both chimps and bonobos, except chimps and bonobos are a little bit different from each other. Chimps are actually vicious and they compete with each other, and they can be nasty. Bonobos are not competitive and aggressive. They share food with strangers. They look for friendship, and they lead with love.
Yeah.
And bonobos don't attack each other and murder each other at nearly the rate that chimps do. And
Wow.
both of these animals, or apes, 99% similar to us. We need to be more like bonobos
Yeah.
and less like chimps, and we
Yeah.
have to let that side of us win out.
It's ironic that you were mentioning this, because later in the program, I'm going to be disclosing some scientific data that does suggest exactly what you're telling us right now, but with respect to the human brain, that people who rely on these false narratives have an abundance of certain proteins in their brain, and the us and them may be a chemical thing. Who knows? But I think we all have it within us to get along, to care for each other. And I hope that doing interviews like this, talking to individuals like yourself, and looking at your community as a mirror, that we can do better.
Yeah, I mean, Bob, we need optimistic voices like yours in the media to help show us the way to do it and remind us how important it is. I teach my kids that to hate someone else, you need to hate yourself first. And so love yourself and love your neighbor. And we got big problems to tackle in this world.
Yeah, we do.
On the immediate horizon, and there's going to be other big problems that come right after we solve COVID and approach climate change and all the rest of it. There's going to be other big problems, and we're not going to be able to do this unless we're working together.
Mr. Mayor, thank you so much for being on Greater Good Radio.
My pleasure, Bob. Thanks for having me.
Take care.
Your home is the most single important investment of your life. Making the right choices when improving or remodeling that home can't be left to chance. For over 5 generations, Standard Tile has set the standard in product line, product knowledge, and service. Whether you're remodeling a kitchen, bathroom, or if you need help with design, make Standard your first choice for quality you deserve. Visit Standard at 316 Route 10 West, East Hanover, New Jersey, 973-884-4933, or visit their website at www.standardtilenj.com. Welcome to New York City. It is the epicenter of planet Earth. That's my opinion, whether you agree or not. I was walking through Manhattan one warm June night a few years ago, just looking at the lights, interacting with people on the street. There is no other place like New York City. I hope you enjoy this next song entitled Manhattan Nights. Who is she right in front of me? An angel came in a still frame, a slender gown in another town, but all I've got is just a still frame. Who is she? Just a fantasy, 'cause I'm locked up in a steel cage. Maybe she makes some plans for me. I got us both on the same page. Questions I would pose to someone that she knows. Stained glass cast a light on this warm Manhattan night. take the breath from me. Stop and think what a lady. Somewhere far away from here, I'll take her hand, yeah, she'll be mine. Yeah, she made me see the voice inside of me. It always turns out right on a warm Manhattan night. The city pulse that joins some tonight, the soft warmth of her eyes. I'm miles away from her touch, doesn't stop the theater in my mind. A warm embrace should be mine tonight, a slow dance, then a kiss. None of this at all seems strange to me, for now she's just a dream. On this warm Manhattan night. Welcome back, everybody. I am also the executive producer of a film entitled When Comedy Went to School. In large part, the film celebrates what the Jewish community did to make a place for themselves to be safe and enjoy by moving up to the Catskill Mountains in New York State. It was the birthplace for stand-up comedy. The film premieres on PBS this September. We'll keep you posted as far as dates and times. So much is said about comedy and how it relates to topics in the news. Look at Saturday Night Live. Look at what Norman Lear did with All in the Family, the Jeffersons, back in the 70s. You know, it was easy to take a look at ourselves and not take ourselves too seriously. But where did this all go? There could be a comparison to the film Idiocracy. It was released in November of 2005. In that film, an Army private, Joe Bowers, and a prostitute take part in a classified Army experiment and are accidentally frozen too long and wake up 500 years in the United States, which has turned into a place where society is devoid of intellectualism, social responsibility, justice, and any human rights. The film, unfortunately and sarcastically, suggests what we are leading up to as a country today if we don't get a grip on who we are. There is a message here for all of us layered in comedy that if we don't wise up and take a good hard look at ourselves, and really do something about what's needed to move forward with each other. That leads me to my next guest, Lawrence Richards. Larry has been an accomplished writer, and he's had many publications, some which have ended up in the Baseball Hall of Fame up in Cooperstown, New York. And he has created numerous treatments and scripts for movies that are currently in development with Greater Good Media, LLC.
Larry, thanks for being on Greater Good Radio.
Well, it's a pleasure to be on, and cliches notwithstanding, thanks for having me.
Sure. Hey, I have to ask, what was the inspiration behind writing When Comedy Went to School?
Well, that's a terrific question, and the answer is actually quite complex. The more I thought about it, the more that topic comes up, the realization that there were so many different layers, some of which were questions from my perspective, others evolved as the narrative and the storylines became more and more complex. I would say the initial impetus was the question, as in most documentaries. It starts with a question. And in the case of When Comedy Went to School, the question was, why are there so many Jewish comedians? Why is that area, entertainment area, so flooded percentage-wise with comics, not just joke tellers, but humorous and observational comedians? And the second part, I think, that spurred the inquiry further was my incredible admiration for Sid Caesar. And I was a devotee of Sid Caesar. I was pretty young. And his comedy timing, his subject matter was so advanced that I wanted to learn more about him. And in the course of the research, Bob, I realized he started in the Catskills. First of all, he first started as a musician with Benny Goodman.
Right.
And then he played up in the Catskills, and there was such a commonality of great comedians from the Catskills who started there and perfected their craft and failed, but learned what was successful, went on to great careers, that the Catskill Hotels was the binding tissue, kind of a comedy boot camp.
Sure.
And that led me to When Comedy Went to School, where the school referred to the Catskill Hotels. Vaudeville was dead. Motion pictures were really coming on, and there was no place for comedians to perform. And the Catskill Hotel complex, which consisted of well over 500 hotels, gave these young guys an opportunity to learn, kind of a comedy boot camp. So those were the two basic thrusts in terms of my research. And as research developed and as the script became richer and fuller, the challenge, Bob, was there were so many sub-themes. Anti-Semitism, the result of anti-Semitism, second and third generation Jewish people feeling comfortable with their own kind, meeting guys meeting girls and girls meeting guys, and it was such a canvas that kept changing and adding in depth and scope, that the challenge, one of the challenges, was trying to keep it on a narrative, a spine of the story, rather than going off into all these tangents. So it became a very complex subject.
Well, that's where I want to start. Is, you and I have had countless conversations now about the
None of
film.
which I've enjoyed.
Of course. Well, Larry,
polite about it, Bob.
You're the only interview I ever wanted to start out with a priest, a rabbi, and a horse walk into a bar. But
hey,
that's it.
My wife said.
So my question is, Larry, because we're dealing with so much that's going on in the past few years with respect to hate, there is a backstory that I embraced. And as our listeners know, I'm the executive producer of When Comedy Went to School. And I think it's just so important to let our listeners know, how did so many of the Jewish community get up to the Catskills?
That's another major theme, as you're obviously well aware, and was sort of part of an integral part of developing the story. Um, Most of the settlers up in the Catskills were from Eastern Europe,
Hmm.
and their legacy, their mode of living was largely rural, largely farming.
Hmm.
And there were other conditions that contributed to why the Catskills, why Sullivan and Ulster County in particular. And it was because of getting away from the city,
Sure.
the heat, a farmland, hospitality, and a retreat from anti-Semitism,
Sure.
and a singular oneness of safety.
Hmm.
They were away, they were with their own kind, and the social mores were enriched by virtue of the fact of the similarity of the guests and
Hmm.
of the hotel owners and the staff.
Sure.
So it was a sociological element as to why the Catskills developed into again this enormous resort complex.
Mhm.
Jewish clientele, Jewish comedians,
Mhm.
Jewish material,
Right.
and it was kind of like a nexus, sort of a confluence of different elements of that present day society, particularly New York area,
Hmm.
in the late 20s, 30s, and really exploded in the 1940s and pretty much ended in the 70s, which is another interesting point because it's an excellent story of the only constant is change.
Hmm.
Something as prosaic as, again, jumping ahead, Bob, air conditioning
Yeah.
affected people going to the Catskills.
Hmm.
They didn't have to leave the summer heat. Second and third Jewish generations, uh, there was less anti-Semitism, certainly not as blatant and not eliminated, but less.
Hmm. Right.
Highways, greater access to the facilities. So it's like a microcosm of society, which really attracted me further and further
Hmm.
as it became more apparent that change is inevitable, and sometimes, almost all the time,
Hmm.
there's an interaction between a quid pro quo, between something changing or an invention, and its effect, its pervasive effect on other elements that you would not think would be associated with why did the Catskills kind of what was the cause of the demise of the Catskills,
Hmm.
as well as the genesis of the Catskills.
Sure. Sure. Well, I have to, in my own thought process, and as we have been moving forward with Greater Good Media LLC's project, We Can
Hmm.
Do Better, to combat hate of any kind. This brings me back to the movie Trading Places from 1983 with Dan Aykroyd and Eddie Murphy.
Hmm.
How so many colleges now are studying that film with respect to race and class and, well, pork bellies, of course. But
That's
how?
a great point, Bob.
Well, thank you. It was the Dukes. It was the Duke brothers.
And they
So
bet a dollar, right?
yeah, what with inflation, it might be
You,
3 or 4.
you're the only guy I've ever known who could make a smooth transition from serious
To complete
issues
nonsense.
to pork bellies. It just
Absolutely.
feels
So
right.
my question to you, though, is do you see the same thing that I do with respect to, we were fortunate enough to have Joe Dorenson
Hmm.
talk about Jewish humor
Hmm.
in the film. I want to get your comments about what is conveyed through comedy. I know you had another project going on with respect to that topic also, but I want to hear in your words, what we can do by just taking in some of the message from the comedians that we've loved so much and relatable to today's world.
Well, I think that requires that kind of a multifaceted answer. And
Hmm.
let me start off with a kind of a generic statement, which is we can get away with. One can say a lot of things in a humorous context that would be difficult for somebody to absorb or to change their view if you said it or if it was stated or written in a serious mode.
Hmm.
humor allows us the ability, the latitude to deal with things that otherwise would be difficult or problematic, i.e., the medieval joker who can make comments about the king and not be beheaded.
Right.
The comedians have that license by virtue of who they are and what they're representing to an audience, whether it be in person or visual or whatever the mode of delivery. In the case of the Jewish people, Bob, I think more so than any other ethnic group, for the millennium or millenniums or centuries, they've been the recipient of hate, of bigotry. Sure. And humor became almost ingrained in the DNA. And I'm making some sweeping statements here, but I think there's a basis in historical truth. Perhaps you agree.
Oh yeah. That
if I can make you laugh, you won't hurt me. It becomes a very admirable and almost necessary way of deflecting pain, deflecting hate, or ingratiating yourself, at least to the extent that you won't be punished in some way, whether it's literally or verbally or from an exclusionary standpoint. And that became, again, part of, I think, the reason why there were so many Jewish comedians from a historical standpoint, because the centuries have been spent using that when other defense mechanisms were lacking. So I think that's endemic to the Jewish culture. And again, the correlation between the Catskill Hotel complex and an opportunity to use humor, not just to entertain, but to educate and try to combat ignorance and bigotry are key elements. And again, as I mentioned earlier, there were so many wonderful storylines to the piece, that the big challenge was trying to keep it on a constant spine, a constant foundation, rather than going off in directions. But the point is, the other directions are an important part of the overall narrative.
Sure. Well, it's like Sid Caesar said in the movie. It's important that you make a joke. It adds some comfort and commonality to us all.
Absolutely. Actually, what the actual quote was, what Sid said, by the way, that was my favorite interview in the film, being a Sid Caesar, worshiper. I mean, really big time. Is when he said he was referring to stress. He was referring to hatred. He was referring to pain, whether it was intellectual or physical. And Sid said, and I quote, "It's hard, but you make a joke."
Yeah.
He also said, if it's not working, shut it down.
And on that note, I want to thank you very much for being with us for this episode of Greater Good Radio. Larry, thanks a lot.
Bob, listen, thank you. And also the great work you're doing. It's right on point. And talk about humor and addressing the hatred that exists and seems to be growing. Boy, do we need it now.
You're not kidding. Thanks a lot, my friend. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Your home is the most single important investment of your life. Making the right choices when improving or remodeling that home can't be left to chance. For over 5 generations, Standard Tile has set the standard in product line, product knowledge, and service. Whether you're remodeling a kitchen, bathroom, or if you need help with design, make Standard your first choice for quality you deserve. Visit Standard at 316 Route 10 West, East Hanover, New Jersey, 973-884-4933, or visit their website at www.standardtilenj.com. Up next is Associate Professor Julie J. Park. Julie is the author of Race on Campus, Debunking Myths with Data, and another publication, When Diversity Drops, Race, Religion, and Affirmative Action in Higher Education. Besides being published in academic journals, her commentary has appeared in venues like the Washington Post, the Huffington Post, and the Chronicle of Higher Education. Welcome to Greater Good Radio, Dr. Park.
Oh, glad to be here.
Hey, I have I'm very, very happy that you're with us today. I always like my listeners to get a good feel for the interview that they're going to hear, and I would love for you to tell us what you've been doing, what the focus is on your curriculum or studies with respect to hate, diversity, inclusion. Anything you want to raise.
Sure. Well, mainly my research looks at racial diversity in higher education, and I also look at Asian American college students. And so, with that, I do a lot of work trying to understand how students of color experience college campuses, how institutions can be more welcoming, and how to make sure that, students are really benefiting from
Mhm.
engaging in a racially diverse community.
Okay, and what can you give us a 411 on what you have observed in the past few years with respect to leading up to the pandemic, with respect to hate and just out and out prejudice that has gained so much momentum?
Sure. You mean in colleges and universities or just sort of in general?
Absolutely, you know what? I'd like to hear your opinion on both.
Sure. Well, on college campuses, we have, I think, in the last couple of years, seen sort of a rise in, say, both racial tension and I think
Mhm.
the desire of students to really challenge and address it head on.
Mhm.
And so I think some of this did coincide with, say, the 2016 election and different things that were, very hateful rhetoric that we saw in the public space. And
Mhm.
then also instances on campus of whether it's racial discrimination or bias type incidents.
Mhm.
And yeah, very troubling. These things were already happening prior to the coronavirus pandemic. I think those really just get to another level, especially for Asian Americans, on college campuses prior to the big shutdown last
Mhm.
year, but then also continuing on, we see just really in all sectors of society a very alarming spike, right, in these incidents. Everything from verbal harassment to physical assault to civil rights violations.
Mhm.
So those are things that are continuing to happen and are just very disturbing.
Sure. Now, Julie, have you or is there any data that you've collected to see? Is there any type of rise in individuals connected to hate groups enrolled in our universities or college campuses?
I myself don't track that data. I'm sure someone out there does, but I think it's a little more I think challenging
Mhm.
right now because you have sort of college campuses they're generally they're physically there, but then
Mhm.
students are taking classes online, etc. And so it's sort of a unique environment. But yeah, I think some of that has manifest on college campuses, or those groups have been probably trying to do some, recruitment,
Mhm.
unfortunately, through the internet.
And what have you gathered with respect to the effect on college kids who are just trying to get good grades and they're uh, tormented by others with respect to who they are, what they look like? Does it really have an impact on their grades, what they're looking to achieve, how they're feeling with just trying to get by and get into the workforce after school?
Yeah, we do know from the research that a negative campus, we call campus racial climate, can have
Mhm.
a negative effect on things like grades, on things like retention, right? Whether students actually stay in college or
Mhm.
graduate. And so, we've seen this sort of continuously, the adverse effect, especially on our Black and African American students, right? Where we have these high profile instances of things like police brutality or just the George Floyd incident, et
Mhm.
cetera. And those things are real stressors, right?
Sure.
Especially in social media where um, incidents are just captured and student people are able to see them directly, right? And
Mhm.
that can cause its own form of sort of trauma or repeat trauma. And then,
Mhm.
I think now you have young Asian Americans, additionally, and other students of color, but for Asian some of the many of them are worried, especially about are my parents or are my grandparents, especially, are they going to be safe? And that's something that can definitely have a negative impact. What that actual impact will be on sort of academic outcomes, I think, is uncertain, but is certainly possible.
Sure, sure. And what is there a consensus or any let's say collective thinking with respect to universities, colleges on what they're doing or advancing to stop the hate, to address it, to move forward and everyone coexist?
Yeah, I don't know about consensus. It's always hard to achieve. But I think, different institutions have taken different approaches, and, there are some challenges with, what might be sort of the ambiguity around what people think is protected, for instance, by the First Amendment, right? So
Hmm.
that's something that pops up. And
Right.
then other things might, my own institution, University of Maryland, there's a lot of debate about students wanting, I think, stronger consequences for
Hmm.
people who perpetuate sort of hate incidents, et
Right.
cetera. And I think it's a matter of it's constantly evolving.
Hmm. I want to touch briefly on the event which will happen on April 22nd at Brooklyn College. You'll be speaking there?
Yes, online, virtually.
Oh, okay. Okay. As we all hope, that these in-person events are going to be coming back to us soon, whether they're concerts or, any kind of symposiums, anything to get together. But is the subject matter of the event diversity in its entirety, or you're looking mainly at the effect on campus?
Yeah, I was asked to speak about Asian Americans
Hmm.
and sort of their educational experiences, and to understand the complexity of this community that is very diverse and
Hmm.
has a really wide range of experiences. But I also plan to talk about, I think it's with Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders right now. It's yeah, you kind of have to address the issue of rising
Yeah.
anti-Asian or AAPI bias
Yep.
and hate incidents, and so I
Mhm.
do plan to touch upon that.
Great. Julie, thank you so much for being on Greater Good Radio, and we're going to look forward to the Brooklyn College event on the 22nd.
Sure, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I want to add just a little something after our interview with Dr. Park. I think it is very important to look at the younger people who are going to school, who may have to deal with this, when they're just trying to get a passing grade. Talk to your kids, talk to your grandmother, talk to everyone. We are blessed in this country with freedom of expression, freedom of speech, freedom of the press. With that said, everybody, please remember that you can listen to this broadcast on the iHeartRadio app, Spotify, and Google Play by just entering Greater Good Radio with Bob Kosh. After hearing our three guests, I wanted to share with the audience my feelings about advancing this platform to get along. Like I said, talk to one another. Communication is everything. Let people know how you feel, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. Work it out. That said, I'm going to leave you with a song I wrote, which I dedicated to my two boys, Corey and Brendan. The song is called We Need to Talk. It's appropriate for this show. Thanks, everybody.
It's all of the things you know that I gotta hide. Tell me please why I'm feeling this way. It started about the time that you went away. It happened like that because you went away. Think about all the things that you missed. You should have been there instead. I'm dealing with this. You've been gone, and it's so much to bear. I'm thinking of you, I know that you really care. Looking at life, you know, it's not really fair. Not really fair. Not really fair. Time has passed, and so have the years. Looking back for us, it's measured in tears. Anxiously, I wait with concern. My heart, my head, my soul, they all kind of burn. Can't wait for the day I know you're gonna return.
Your home is the most single important investment of your life. Making the right choices when improving or remodeling that home can't be left to chance. For over 5 generations, Standard Tile has set the standard in product line, product knowledge, and service. Whether you're remodeling a kitchen, bathroom, or if you need help with design, make Standard your first choice for quality you deserve. Visit Standard at 316 Route 10 West, East Hanover, New Jersey, 973-884-4933, or visit their website at www.standardtilenj.com. Solving or at least diffusing situations where an individual has expressed hatred, especially when he or she is spreading that negativity through a false narrative. Addressing these topics or issues boils down to the biggest question in any language. The 3-letter word, why. Once you ask the question why, it creates the need for the person responding to engage in deductive reasoning. Why, once again, is a word and a question. is a tough thing to answer, as many do not have the capacity to give a logical statement when the topic starts out, let's say, well, they say that this happened, or I heard from somebody that. Nothing makes me crazier. It's hearsay. It starts out as a complete misrepresentation. I engaged in conversation with a family friend who was complaining that certain people collect a check every month to get by. They don't work. I'm paying for them to live. And I just waited a second and asked, now, that person who made this statement lives in a nice home. I asked her, would you trade places with the person who's receiving that monthly check and give up what you have? And she responded, no. Well, maybe these people who do receive a check or survive on a month-to-month basis are suffering in some way and desperately want to be you. I'm sure that person wants to live their life with having a roof over their head, enough to eat, and a better chance to succeed. Once again, I asked her why, and there was dead silence. She couldn't think of anything to really say, and it made her think. I mean, that's what I want to try to convey. Start thinking about why. Traveling down that road and getting there is tough when you really have to look at what you believe, how you believe it, where did it come from. If everyone would just take a couple of seconds and really just think and make a decision, it's the start of something much better. Taking this and complicating this a little further is what we have fallen into in the way we communicate. The internet, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, it only allows you to use a certain amount of characters, a specified amount of words to convey what we want to say to each other. You state a position, then you get a limited response from someone else, and gone are the days of analysis and thinking. More times than not, you get some sort of emoji or thumbs up. We as a society no longer discuss or even care enough to assess a certain situation with real dialogue. People who think like this are voters. They're people who sit on juries. Do you really want to be involved, God forbid you get involved in a trial, with the people in the jury box deciding your fate that lack the ability to deliberate, to think, to use their deductive reasoning? This is truly a frightening thing that faces us. This is a topic which needs to be ongoing. This is not a stick and move type of thing that is just going to cure itself. Like I said, we're in this for the long haul. We are going to be visiting places and engaging with people who have this thought process. And there is going to be a separate segment on a show later on in May where we're going to have on some scientists that have identified certain proteins in the brain that suggest some people are more susceptible to spreading a false narrative than actually dealing with the facts before them. Greater Good Media LLC is asking you to come on board for this groundbreaking project to address hate so we can do better. Go to the Greater Good LLC website or go to our YouTube channel at www.greatergoodmediallc.com. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Bob Kosh, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Greater Good Radio. And wait, I gotta say goodbye to Q, V1, Black Just, Hussein, Percy, Mi Gente, Brian and Willie. Have a good day, everybody.